It's not every day that you can find a football boot from a reputable company for just $50. And it's even more rare for a boot that cheap to be any good. So today we're putting the entry-level Puma Future Play to the test to see how it fares against the competition. And I really love getting the chance to talk about cheaper models because I know that they're going to be a lot more accessible for most players. And every once in a while, when you look at more affordable boots, you do come across a gem. And if you are interested in picking up the Puma Future Play or any of the other boots that we discuss, there'll be links in the description where you can find them for sale online. And speaking of links in the description, you can also join the Upper 90 Patreon where you can find some exclusive content and help support the channel. So let's start off by diving into the design of the Puma Future Play. So the very first thing you'll notice if you pick up a pair of these boots is that the upper is going to be pretty different to the three variations above this, being the Puma Future Ultimate, Future Pro, and Future Match. In fact, one of the only similarities between this boot and the more expensive models is that you are still at least going to have an elasticated collar running down the lacing system. However, on this model, you're not going to have the soft fusion fit mesh upper that you're used to seeing on the more expensive versions. Instead, you're going to have a much thicker synthetic material that's a lot more common for boots at this price point. Now in the heel area, you are going to get a light amount of padding, which is just going to help your foot be a little bit more comfortable when you're in the boots. That being said, towards the ankle area of the heel here, it is a little bit rigid. And it does make for a little bit of an odd transition period in the boot when you go from the relatively rigid heel area to this soft elasticated tongue. And that's something we'll talk about more when we go into the fit of the boots. But throughout the rest of the upper, you are still going to get Puma's Future Tape on the side here, which actually does have a little bit of grippy material on it. Now, I've never been a huge fan of the power tape on any models from the Future series, just because I don't really think it does anything, but nevertheless, it's still nice to see that they've included it on this cheaper variation. Because I was partially expecting for them to just draw on that power tape here and for it to be the same texture as the rest of the upper, but you actually do get a little bit of added grip, a little bit of added texture throughout that area. Then turning around to the back of the boot, you get what I think is one of the best features on the Puma Future Play, and that's going to be the dynamic motion outsole. And the reason why I think this is one of the best features is because it's pretty much the same outsole that you're going to be getting on the Puma Future Match and the Puma Future Pro. It's pretty lightweight and contributes to the weight savings overall in the boot. It's relatively snappy throughout the midfoot and has a nice bit of bend in the toe box, and it has a great combination of both conical and bladed studs. In fact, the only difference between this sole plate and the sole plate you find on the top end Puma Future Ultimate is that the Ultimate version is going to have all bladed studs throughout both the heel and the forefoot. And then finally, the insole of the boot is going to be quite soft. That being said, it's not removable. So if you are someone that does like to put in their own insole, just know that's not going to be an option with this boot. And so overall, the most important things to note about the design is that while this boot does maintain the aesthetic of the Puma Future line, it is pretty different in terms of feel just because you're not going to have that mesh upper that you typically have in the other Future models. So let's talk about how those design changes impacted the fit and feel. So if I'm going to be real with you guys, my expectations were not very high, as is the case with any boot I pick up that's less than $60. And as I expected, these boots aren't perfect, but they also weren't the worst boot that I've tried on at this price point. So to start off with the cons of the fit and feel, this boot was just a little bit awkward to put on just because the heel is pretty rigid, so just getting your foot into the boot, you kind of have to jam it in there. And then once you have the boots on feet, you're going to notice that they're a lot less flexible in the upper compared to the more expensive versions. Due to the lack of that mesh upper and this much more thicker synthetic material that's used, you're just going to notice a little bit more stiffness. But that being said, there were some good things to highlight about the feel of these boots. First up, the lockdown was actually pretty good. And that's something that's oftentimes a problem when it comes to these cheaper boots. Now, I do have one tip as far as the lockdown is concerned. You have to make sure that these laces are pretty much as tight as they can go. And that's because the kind of lockdown you're going to get from this elasticated material that runs across the toe box here is essentially nothing. It's hardly even keeping the upper together. So all you have to do is once you get your feet into these boots, make sure you tie them as tight as possible, especially on this last lace hole here around the ankle. I noticed a little bit of movement in the boot once I first put them on, but then I just retied the laces a little bit tighter and the lockdown improved significantly. And overall, I found the boots relatively comfortable and I didn't get any pressure point in any one area of the boots. Now, as far as the shape, these are a little bit more narrow than I would typically wear. Now, on the more expensive versions of the Puma Future, like the Pro version and Ultimate version that I've tried on in the past, you can kind of get away with that narrow shape because the upper is so flexible that it's going to be accommodating for most foot shapes. However, since the upper here doesn't have that much stretch, I think it's going to be best for players with a narrow foot shape to a more average foot shape. And as far as sizing is concerned, I went for my standard 10.5 US and they fit true to size for me. So once I had these boots on, what were they actually like to play in? Well, once I had the laces secured, I honestly had a pretty good time playing in these boots. They were comfortable enough, had a really solid lockdown, and also more than enough traction on the pitch. And because of the inclusion of some conical studs in the sole plate, I actually felt more comfortable playing these on AG as well. Especially since the AG pitch I play on is relatively new and does a good job at replicating the feel of natural grass. That being said, I think it would be cool if Puma released a full AG version of all their models that just had conical studs throughout the entire sole plate. Now regarding the touch on the ball, although it was really clean, there wasn't a ton of sensitivity. And that's mostly due to the fact that the upper is relatively thick and not very flexible. And honestly, that was my biggest issue when it came to the fit and feel. And this was really noticeable for me because just a couple weeks ago, I was playing with boots that had a razor thin upper like the New Balance Furon V7 Pro, as well as the Tequila. And I was playing with some great leather boots like the Adler Horenzo and the Copa Pure 2 Plus. But it's important to keep in mind that this boot is coming in at about a quarter of the price of all the boots I just mentioned. So in that respect, I think it holds up pretty well. And it's not that common that you see a one-piece upper football boot with an elasticated collar that retails for this cheap. And honestly, the fact that the lockdown in these boots is as good as it is means that it's going to be better than most boots at this price point. My biggest letdown, as I already mentioned, is that you're just not going to get that sock-like fit and feel when you're playing with the ball compared to the other Puma Future models. But let's talk about the value of these boots and whether or not they're worth your money. So the original retail price for the Puma Future Play was $60, but now you can pick them up on sale for $50. So just off the bat, it's going to be cheaper than 90% of the boots on the market. In fact, it's going to be really close in price to the Galetto 8, which is the cheapest boot that you can buy from Adidas. And when comparing between those two boots, I'd say that they're pretty similar in quality, with the Puma Future Play having a slight edge in terms of performance. So at just $50, I do think that the Future Play is pretty decent value for money. But the really important thing to take note of is that by bumping up your budget by just about $20, you can get some much better options. And that's going to bring us to the competitors of the Puma Future Play. Because in the $70 to $80 range, you're going to be able to find boots that are just a cut above as far as build quality and overall comfort. And the first two that I want to mention are going to be the Copa Pure 2.3 from Adidas, as well as the Tiempo Legend 10 Academy from Nike. Now, both of those boots are going to have just a slightly softer upper and just a more comfortable fit on feet. And you can tell here just looking at the difference between the Copa Pure 2.3 and the Puma Future Play, they just have a little bit of a better design around the ankle area in my opinion. Here with the Puma Future Play, it's just a really sudden change in material here that just isn't really discreet, and you notice that when you're playing with the boots. It's almost like Puma may have done themselves a disservice by trying to execute that one-piece upper with the elasticated tongue. They may have almost been better off going with something like an open traditional lacing system like Adidas went with. And then the elephant in the room is the Puma Future Match, which is the slightly more expensive version of this model. And you can currently find the Future Match on sale for just $70, making it literally $20 more expensive than the Future Play. And with the Match version, you're just going to get a boot that much more closely represents what the Puma Future is all about compared to this version. So if you are a big fan of the Future series, but you're shopping on a budget, the Puma Future Match or even the Puma Future Pro, if you can stretch your budget further, are going to be slightly better options. So as for my final thoughts, I think the Puma Future Play is a decent boot that's decent value for money. But without spending that much more money, there's going to be a lot of options on the market that I think are going to be better for most people. And that is going to do it for this video, guys. So let me know in the comments if there's any other boots that you're interested in me reviewing. I've obviously seen that the new Predator has been released, so I'm really excited to get my hands on that as soon as possible. Please give the video a like if you've enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any reviews. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.